Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good everything. How are you all doing? Beautiful. I'm doing super, super well. We're back. We're into that space, the Word Cafe live show, and we are back, like we normally do it. We come in here to lean on one another's experience and forge a positive path. How are you? Beautiful. I know you are doing pretty well. Yes, what are we going to be doing today? You're wondering is there on the screen. I mean, I'm privileged to have this amazing personality by the name Graham Brown. He's been within the space of storytelling, podcasting, and corporate podcasting, content creation, and what have you. He's been there. We can call him more or less a guru in that space. And coming into the studio today to share with us his experience, what it's been like over this period. Come on, strap on your seatbelt. You know how we do it. We're going to go on a ride, a beautiful ride. I'm going to bring him on now. I know you want to see him like I want to see him too. And that is Graham Brown. Hi, Graham.
Hey, Amakri. Thank you.
Yeah,
How far? How
thank you.
far?
How are
That's
you?
my best. I've been practicing some
Oh,
Nigerian. I
oh,
did some
look at
research,
that.
but I found out there's about 20 different ways of saying hello in Nigerian. So I
Exactly.
just,
20 different ways, but the common way we say it is just what you just said now. How far? And when you say
how
how far,
far?
we're going to respond, I did now. I did. What's up? How your side? What thing they happen? And that's how we say it, back.
Right. Nice. I'm
Amazing. I
learning.
like that. Good. I like that. So, where are you at now?
I'm in Singapore. So yeah,
Oh,
just here we are in Southeast Asia.
okay.
The little red dot, as they call Singapore, a small city, 6 million
Mm,
people.
my. Good. So, what's the weather like? Raining, sunny, or?
Uh, it's probably like your rainy season, right? So
Yeah.
it's hot, and we have a wet season, and then we have a wetter
Mm-hmm.
season.
And winter
So
season,
that's kind
okay?
of how it works here. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
good. I like it. I enjoy it. It's tropical.
Just like we have it here in Nigeria presently, like you said, it's raining, like since on Monday, it's been raining and raining, and, we get used to it. And, you have to go out there and do your business and all that. So before we kickstart this amazing session, I want to know who is Graham Brown because I did some reading here and there and amazing facts. I got to find out about you, but I want to hear it from you. Who is Graham Brown?
Okay, that's a good question. I'm a storyteller. That's
Mm,
what I've been doing for many years, and that's why it's great to be here because I know you touch on areas of storytelling and obviously the
yeah.
word,
Mm-hmm.
the power of the spoken word, the belief
Exactly.
in stories. I've been telling
Exactly.
stories and I'm helping people tell stories because you know what, Amakri, we've been telling stories for thousands of years
Mm-hmm.
as a species, right? And
Yeah.
stories bring us together, they give us purpose, and
Yeah.
suddenly we find ourselves in this digital world, but we're still
Mm-hmm.
telling stories in different ways,
Exactly.
whether it's like you and I telling, we'll tell some stories today, I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's
We
about the
will.
weather or somebody's personal
Exactly.
journey, right? We're still telling stories, and I think that's a very core part of being a human being. So I see
Mm-hmm.
myself as a storyteller and helping people with that
Mm-hmm.
skill.
Oh, beautiful. So when did you really discover this about, storytelling? When did you discover that?
Well, I was one of those kids that my mom would, slap me and say, "Hey, stop telling stories." That's the first thing you learn. And when you go
Mm-hmm.
to school, you remember what it was like at school. Stop telling stories. That was a bad thing, right?
Mm.
It was almost like you're making things up. You're twisting the truth. So at an early
Mm.
stage, I loved telling stories. I was fascinated by
Yeah.
books and stories of all different forms. But at a later stage in life, when I got into the world of work, I
Mm.
found I really what I discovered on Macri was I discovered the difference between if you share information with
Yeah.
a story and without a story, if you just share data or
Yeah.
data plus a story, it's a very different outcome. At the time, I had a research company selling data to
Yeah.
telecoms companies with 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And I found that they would buy our research, and I would go and do these presentations
Mm-hmm.
to these companies, and all the data was great. It was the best data out there,
Mm,
right? The best data in the world. All
mm,
different markets. We covered everything from Nigeria to Europe to US, etc. I'd present this data, and people just didn't connect with it. And I really
mm.
struggled with it. And only when I started turning that data into stories. So I would actually,
Okay.
rather than tell a story about, mobile ownership in Nigeria, 50%
Mm,
of under 35-year-olds
mm,
have a mobile phone. Nobody really connected with
mm,
that. I started focusing on the story. So there was this young kid called Amakri, and he had a mobile phone,
mm,
and this is what he did with it, right? And when they
mm.
started getting into the stories, people changed. And we see this everywhere, don't we? We see it in business where people present data to teams.
Yeah.
We see it
Yeah.
when people are raising money, right, for NGOs and
Yeah.
causes, right? They don't talk
Yeah.
about, so many million people starving. They always talk about this one kid, don't they? You adopt a kid in this country rather than
Mm-hmm.
donate a lot of money to a
Mm.
cause. So
Yeah.
that's how I discovered it. I discovered what it was like if you didn't do that.
Yeah.
And that's why I was forced into this pathway and
Mm.
to discover what storytelling was all about and why it was important.
Beautiful. One time on my show, I had this personality. His name is Flo Akimbi. He's somewhere in Dubai. He's into communication, and all that. And what you just said now about data collection and presentation without the storytelling is like something, a dead doornail or something. People don't
Mm,
relate with it. So he actually, you know, said something similar to what you have just said. You don't just go out there and throw the data in front of the people and all that, but there should be a way of communicate. He's a communication expert, actually. There should be a way of
mm,
communicating this data as in to your audience, letting them connect with it exactly like you said it. But now, how do you get the humanity behind the data? How do you get the humanity? Because that's what you just said now. For me to
mm,
connect with that story, there is this humanity you bring into it. How do you do that?
mm. Yeah, that's a good question. How do you create that connection? Well, I think the good news is that we've been telling stories for thousands of years, and therefore the stories we tell are all kind of similar.
Mm,
So, if you look at movies, if you look at books, if you look at religious texts, if you look at any sort of cultural narrative that we tell, it tends
yeah.
to fall into one of seven, maybe eight or nine different formats. There tends to be very similar patterns throughout time. Now,
Hmm.
I'll give you some examples. And this is like
Please do.
how you find the stories and humanity in data. When Steve Jobs launched the iPhone, when he stood in front of the Macworld crowd in
Mm,
2006 and introduced the iPhone, he didn't stand up and say, I've got a really good phone here. He didn't
hmm.
say that. That's what we would do, isn't it? I've got a phone. I
Yeah.
want to show how great it is. Look at the interface and so on. What he did was he used a format which is used for thousands of years, and it's called the accidental hero narrative. You think about how many movies start with that kind of scene where, you know, he didn't choose to be here at this time. The world chose him. He sort of accidentally became the hero in this narrative. And Steve Jobs uses that narrative
Mm,
very cleverly in launching the iPhone. If you look at it, you can see it on YouTube. He presents the bad guy who is the mobile phone
hmm.
industry. These were people who design phones with buttons. You remember those? Like BlackBerry and all those kind of Nokia
Yeah.
phones with buttons. He sort of presented all
BlackBerry.
these bad designs.
Okay.
Yeah. All that stuff from the day. And he sort of presented it and he said, like, this is the bad guy, the antagonist in the story. He didn't use those words, but he presented imagery we really understood. And then, you
Yeah.
know, who's going to save us? Who's going to bring the world back to normal? Well, Apple, of course. They were drawn into this. They didn't want to launch a phone. They were forced
Mm.
to launch a phone because they couldn't
Important.
sit back and watch bad design take over. So that's an example of
Yeah.
using humanity. And we see that everywhere. We see it For example, when if you're a business owner and you're raising money, the accidental hero narrative is very popular to be used.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many of these different formats and tropes which are used in culture, fairy tales, movies. And once you
Mm-hmm.
start examining them, you see actually, wow, that really looks like what somebody's used here and what somebody's used here. And this is the really interesting part, Amakri, is that
Yeah.
when we think about how do I engage an audience with story, we always think I've got to create an amazing story. I really got to wow them, knock their socks off, right? But the reality
Mm.
is that the best stories are stories we've already heard. Now think about that. Is that pretty
Yeah.
much every Hollywood, Nollywood, Bollywood
Mm-hmm.
movie that you've
Yes.
seen, right,
All,
has a
all the
very
woods.
they're all familiar, right? They have very
They
familiar
are.
characters. Like the
Yeah.
bad guy, I'm sure in a Nollywood movie, I'm sure the bad guy looks like a bad guy in pretty much most Nollywood movies, right? And the same in
Exactly.
Bollywood.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And you probably think, well, that's not original. But the point is that we want familiar. We want the familiar story because we
Mm.
are used to it and we enjoy it. We don't like the unfamiliar. We're scared as a
Of the
group
unfamiliar.
of people, we're scared of what we don't know. So what stories do is they take the unknown and they turn it into the known. And that's what we've been doing for thousands of years, where you're telling stories about, oh, why is there a big thunderstorm? You know, you can imagine
Mm.
thousands of years ago, lightning, people were scared.
Mm.
You tell a
Mm.
story about it. You know, why are the crops failing? Well, tell a
Mm.
story about it. So all
Mm.
of that really has been used by us as a species for thousands of years to help people make sense of the world. And the
Mm.
great news is, even in the digital world, whether you're doing podcasts, launching an app, whatever it may be, or just
Mm-hmm.
engaging a team that you're leading, you can
Mm-hmm.
look to these stories, find these formats that work and adapt them. Just change the characters. The character could be a mobile phone, the character could be a brand, the character could
Mm.
be a vaccine, you know, whatever it is you
Mm.
want to use as a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And you can use that to engage people and use that main line to their conscious, their subconscious. And that's how they will engage with the story.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Now, you've been in the corporate podcasting space for a while now. I mean, tell me, what has it been like in terms of reception? Uh, because back here in Nigeria, podcasting is something still growing, growing compared to the US and Europe and
Mm.
the likes. So, what has it been like, the reception for you, corporate podcasting?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's early days, you know. You think
Hmm.
about
Okay.
where you are in Nigeria, you are on this trajectory, just as we are in Singapore and people are in the US. You imagine
Mm,
this curve, and everybody kind of follows that curve and it has
mm,
similar patterns. And some countries are early on the curve, you know, some countries maybe later on the curve, like for example, the US or Korea, very advanced in corporate podcasting.
yeah.
So to me, it reminds, because 20 years of being in the mobile phone business, I remember
Mm,
in the early days, people said, no, 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 mobile phones are too small. They'll never work, you know, and they will never work in my country. That's what people were saying. I remember them
yeah.
saying that in the US in the late 90s. I was there presenting, and
Mm,
Americans told me, you know, cell phones would never work here. And I was like, well, I've seen young people in markets like Japan using cell phones. And
yeah.
I know that that's coming here soon because young people in Japan, young people in America and Nigeria, they're all very similar. They all have similar
Very.
needs. So it's coming here soon. And it did. And Nigeria, same, one of the biggest markets in the world for mobile phones, right? So
Yeah. Right.
it's an early stage. But I
Okay.
think we'll all kind of, I would say that it's a bit like internet adoption. You
Hmm.
know, some countries are a bit slower, but in time, pretty much every company will have a podcast.
Beautiful. Now, that what you just said now takes us to the next question.
Mm.
Why should I, as an organization or a corporation, want want to podcast? Why should I do that?
Yeah, it depends. Macri, if you are a small company, individual, like an author, a thought leader,
Mm,
consultant, small startup, that's one group of people. And
mhm,
then there are large corporations like banks, management consultancies, government agencies, and so on.
yeah,
With the first group, let's say you and I, we are authors or startup founders or individual entrepreneurs.
yeah,
Uh, the best way today to get into podcast and why you should do it is looking at guesting on podcasts, right?
okay,
Because it's hard work building a podcast, as you and I both know. Building
mhm,
an audience
yeah,
is hard work. But if somebody's done the hard work for you, then that makes life a lot easier. And so, therefore, the reason why you should think about doing it is really two reasons. One is because it's probably the most effective way to meet people, and that
yeah,
is a very powerful business development tool.
yeah,
Think if I said to you, how much is it worth for you? How much value to your business would it be to get in front of 100 buyers in your industry? You'd be, oh yeah, I'll
mm,
do that. You know, that's a lot of
mhm,
money potentially, a lot of value.
mm,
100 buyers and have 1 hour with them, right? Now, if you
yeah,
think about how difficult that is today, phone calls, emails, meetings. But if you could do that, if you could sit with that person and have a deep conversation
yeah,
and really connect, not a coffee. We have a coffee, you
mm,
forget. Years to come, people ask, "Hey, Macri, who's that Graham Brown guy?" You're like, I don't remember.
exactly, yeah,
Somebody I had a coffee with. But we'll never forget this podcast. Like, we connected, we had a chat. That will
yeah,
be on the internet for years and years to come. So
true,
the answer to your question, why, is because it's an extremely powerful way of scaling your business across different markets into different
mm,
sectors and have conversations with people at scale. What a great business development tool that is. A great way to build a funnel, especially if you're in B2B or
yeah,
services.
yeah,
That's the small company. For the big companies, it's a little bit different, but it's still the underlying factor is how do you create conversations at scale? How do you humanize your
yeah,
brand? How do you create connections with your network and your people? How do you showcase your
yeah,
work? How do you create conversations that matter with people who care? These are all
mm,
really important for large businesses now. People want to know, what's your CEO's view on diversity? What's your
exactly,
business's attitude towards the environment or climate change, right? People
mhm,
want to know, do you have ethical trade practices? People want to know these things, right?
right,
And the reality is today, this is the important part for all of this. The
mm,
reality is today that people follow people, not brands. And
mm,
this is what we're waking up to, Amakri, is that
yeah,
so much of business is built up around brands, but people don't care about brands. They care about
mhm,
the people of those
the
brands. So
people,
who is that person? What do they know? How do my experience of the brand is through you, right?
mm,
And how you interact
yeah,
with me. If you're not nice to me, it's not my experience of the brand doesn't. It's not going to be a good experience, right? But if we interact, I think, hey, I really like this Amakri guy, right?
mm,
That's going to create a really positive experience of the brand. So how can I
true,
do that at scale through podcasts? So I think that's
beautiful,
really important. That it's a great way to unlock the human potential and those
mm,
conversations within your organization that are happening every single day.
mm. Now, humanizing your product. I was listening to a podcast. That was today, yes, and it's on human resources HR now. And the guest on the show was like, a lot of us, a good number of us, don't like the word HR. That's human resource. We
Mm,
rather look at it from the people perspective. You
mm,
don't see me like a resource, like an asset or something, but rather look at me as a human being, and you deploy more or less my talent or whatever. So listening
mm,
to you say people connect more with people. You humanize the product, not necessarily the brand. I mean, that just came back to me now. And it's like,
mm,
what are, what are you selling? Not just a product. You're selling, you're selling would I use the word correctly? Humanity. Like I can connect to this. This is not just like one inanimate thing, but I can connect with what this person is saying or what he or
Mm,
she is presenting. So I am going for the humanity behind the brand or in the brand, not necessarily just the brand for the brand. Now,
mm,
you said something about guesting. That's one difficult aspect when it comes to podcasting, guesting. How do I go about my guesting? And
mm.
what is
As a
guesting
get,
all about?
Gotcha. So guesting is where, like I'm doing now, I'm a guest on your podcast. I'm speaking to
Yeah.
your listeners, right? So you have a community
Hmm.
of people around you built around the word cafe and your
Yeah.
themes, your ideas. And it's a little bit different to mine, which is going to be the case because your personal brand and my personal brand are different with different people, right? Different personalities. What I can do
True.
by connecting with you is connect with your audience. And some of them, maybe some of you people listening today, you connect with me through this. And maybe some people think, no, 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 that's not me. But that's the point. That's the great thing about
Mm.
guesting is I get to speak to other people's audiences. And maybe some
Other
of those
people.
audiences become
Yeah.
my audience as well. In podcasting, 1 + 1 = 3, right? It's not like I'm taking an audience
Mm.
away. It's like, our networks are coming together effectively, right? So some of my audience
To get.
will see this, listen to this, and think, hey, I really love
Yeah.
what Amakri's doing, right? So we're helping each other out
For you.
because we're connecting
Exactly.
to potentially aligned audience. So that's what guesting does. It's really getting out there, finding podcasts that match your themes, your talking points, and then creating
Yeah.
that connection and getting on the podcast and not selling. It's like you just said, like
Mm.
people buy the humanity, right? If I came on here and pitched, it would be awful. What kind of conversation is that? But we're having a
Mm.
conversation here, right? And I think that's what somebody would say, yeah, I like
Yes, we
this guy. Maybe I want to go and check him out. They'll go and check out the backstory and then maybe they'll follow me,
are. Mm.
right? That's how it works
Yeah.
now these days.
Right. 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 Amazing. You're not pitching, but rather we're having a conversation here. And it's like this conversation we're having, or my audience, your audience, they listen and they begin to see things from different perspective or a better perspective. Like, would I say a hybrid,
Hmm.
creating a hybrid of ideas with respect to giving concept and patterns. It's like, okay, fine. I heard Graham on that show. I heard a Macri on that show, and this was what they said. Okay, fine. We can put this together and like create something unique, something new out there. Now, on the front burner in the corporate world today, we talk about things like diversity, uh,
Hmm.
ESGs, and just what have you. And recently, I saw, I think that was the EU, the European Union, they had a podcast. And I also
Hmm.
saw the World Bank put up a podcast. And I went to listen, and one of them, they were talking about inflation, economics. And I was like, before now, we read about these things on newspapers, you hear it on the mainstream media. What has informed these corporations or these organizations to more or less create a podcast? What has informed them? And I'm asking you that question now. What do you think
Hmm.
is behind them, breaking into this podcasting world?
It could be a number of things. They are going to be a number of factors why they did
Okay.
it right now. But ultimately, underneath it, Amakri, is there really is no alternative
Mm.
for them to communicate. And they need to communicate. Without communication, they don't exist. These companies spend billions of dollars on
Yeah.
comms, PR, communication, and they need to
Mm.
communicate for a number of reasons as
Yeah.
well. Like they need to communicate because they need to talk to stakeholders. these, if you're the World Bank, you have a lot of stakeholders in your community, right? Those could not just people in the financial community, but you have decision makers in government and NGOs and
Yeah.
etc. Right? Economists and authorities, authors, everybody. You need to talk to these people. How can you
Yeah.
talk to these people now?
Yeah.
Like, we don't have events like we used to.
Yeah.
People don't travel to conferences like they used to. People don't read white papers. You can't send emails and
We
get
used
people.
to.
We don't have captive We used to have captive audiences, right? Do you remember in those days where you could send an email and
Mm.
people read it? Like, like in companies, like internal emails, that doesn't happen anymore. Or a company could
Mm.
get all its people, they could fly their people to an island and say, right, we're going to have an event with all these people. It doesn't work anymore. We don't have captive audiences. So the point is that audiences have choice. Their attention is extremely valuable now and it's stretched. That word attention, it actually comes from the same, and this
Mm-hmm.
is the word cafe. So let's do some words. So the
Mm.
word attention, it comes from Latin in English. It comes from Latin and it comes from the word tendere. And tendere
Mm.
in Latin is the same as the tendon in your arm. The bit of the muscle in your arm, not the, but joins the muscle to the bone. And that's the bit
Mm.
that stretches.
The muscle.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so attention
Mhm.
by nature is actually stretched. And
Mhm.
that's the reality. It's stretched so thin today for the audiences. That's why the World Bank or any organization cannot rely on existing or old school communications because these people aren't paying attention to them anymore.
Mm.
And think about that word as well, pay. We pay attention, right? We
Anymore.
don't give attention, we pay attention. That's a really conscious choice of words in English because it shows
Mhm.
that attention is valuable. It has a cost to us. If
So
you, the listener, are listening to me, you're paying attention to me. You are paying to listen, right? Think about that. You're
to
paying with your
listen. Yeah.
time and your attention. That's why companies need it because attention is the biggest cost in modern communication. And if you have people's attention, you're a leader. You're a thought leader by default. You don't have to
Mm.
be an
Right.
MBA. You don't have to be
Mm.
an expert. You just have to have
Mm.
attention. That's why there's a war
Yeah.
for attention now, right? And it comes
Yeah.
back to podcasting as a great way to connect and hold people's attention in a very, in a very informative way, an educational way, and it's not salesy. So that's one of the major reasons why these companies are doing podcasts. And I think, from the human resources side as well, if you think about that, Amakari, that
Yeah.
how much do these companies
Mhm.
spend on hiring and retaining talent? We're talking billions, hundreds of billions, getting the best people and keeping
Mm.
them. Now, what is the best way to get new
Yeah.
people in human resources traditionally is a gatekeeper, right? It's a risk controller in the organization. But increasingly human resources has to think about how do we
Yeah.
get and reward people, not just control
Yeah.
them, right? So if you're a
Mm.
young change maker and you're thinking about the World Bank, what do you do? Like your first question
You
is
go.
going to be, who are these people? Who am I going to work with if I join the World
Yeah.
Bank, right? They'll go to the website, About
Mhm.
Us page. Nah, it's all
Mhm.
very corporate. The first thing they'll do is they'll go and listen to the podcast.
Mm.
And I guarantee in hiring, it's
Mm.
probably the one of the most overlooked, underappreciated, and most powerful ways to attract talent because that is the first thing they're going to check out when they want to know who are the people inside this brand.
Mm. Beautiful. You saying this now drives my thought, as in because when I listen to the what do you call it now, the World Bank podcast and the EU podcast, I was just asking myself the question, this particular question I just put before you, but the answers you gave now, perfect. Because it's like, okay, I want to work for this organization.
Hmm.
Instead of going to read tons and tons of documents, as it were, about this organization, I just pop into the podcast, you know, about them, and I listen to them. Okay, we're back.
You're back. Yeah. I lost you
Can you
there.
hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I lost it. Yeah, for a bit. So I go check out their
Mm.
podcast, and I listen. I said, "Oh, fine. Oh, wow. This I mean, this is what I know about the organization. Wonderful. You know, you see the CEO, maybe you see the CFO, you see
Mm.
the HR head or something, and you listen to them. They talk about the organization, not just like you said a while ago, the brand, no, but the humanity,
Mm-mm.
the people around there. And this creates that connection, and like you said, I am paying
Mm.
attention. There's a
Mm.
value that comes to me, and at the same time a value that goes to the organization because somebody just listened to us. So the likelihood for that person to like embrace our should I say values, what we
Yes.
stand for, is rooftop. As in the person comes and goes, takes that further step to make more inquiries about the organization. Beautifully put,
Mm.
beautifully put. Now, I know, for the want of time, because you have to catch up with other things too, what's your advice there for those organizations, you know currently, what is going on the global scene across the world? What is your advice with respect to this universe of podcasting? What's your advice?
Mm. Uh, so the key to success in podcast really lies in a number of factors. So,
Hmm.
really starting with the end in mind, what do you want this podcast to be? It's always a good start. What is the promised land that you want to create
Hmm.
with the podcast? That's the pitch, isn't
Hmm.
it, to all the stakeholders? Um,
Yeah,
Firstly,
yeah,
find somebody who will be an anchor host. I think it's really important because what I find in corporations, large organizations, is often there is a sense that they need to share the hosting. And what tends to happen is if you share the hosting too much, it moves around too much, the audience doesn't connect. I
yeah.
listen to the Word Cafe because of Amakri, right? And you listen to my podcast
Right.
because of me, not necessarily the guests. You're the guide. You're the bridge. You're the one who asks the questions for
Exactly.
the audience. You're the one who understands the audience's pain and frustrations and the questions in their
Mm,
mind and what
true.
bothers them, right? So
Right.
we as listeners connect with the host, right? Not with the guest. The guest is like,
Mm,
an extra person. There are three people in this conversation right now. There's Graham, Amakari, and you, the listener, right? We're sitting
the
around this
listener.
table together having a conversation. And hopefully, if you sort of like tune into your headphones, you feel like you're there. You feel that
Yeah,
feeling,
there.
connection, that sound.
Exactly.
So it's so important if you listening, sitting at the table with us today, are in that
Hmm.
situation in that large organization, large corporation, your best starting point with that project is to identify who can be that person. Because if you can find that anchor, that one person, they don't have to do every podcast. They can co host, they can
Mm,
rotate around, but they have to be a regular voice
mm.
in that podcast.
Yeah,
Without that, it's really
yeah.
hard to make a podcast successful long term. All the other things like how often do I publish? How long should the
Mm.
how long should the episode be? What platforms? All of that
See?
becomes secondary because it goes back again
Yeah.
to people follow people, right? Ultimately, if I don't like the
People follow
host,
people.
I don't care what the brand is that this is about. If
You're very correct.
right, you could be Coca
Right.
Cola or whoever, Disney, but if that host bugs
Mm,
me, I'm out, right? But if I like the host,
mm,
then I want to find out about the brand, right? The brand second. So that's so
mm,
important.
mm.
They don't have to be like a radio or
Mm.
TV presenter. They're just somebody who is passionate about what they do and wants to create
Yeah.
conversations.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Graham, thank you so much. I mean, I appreciate this opportunity, for accepting to come in to the Word Cafe and share this. You just gave a perspective to podcasting, and I know my audience, as in they will appreciate, and they are appreciating it, because sometimes this question just comes, why should I, and somehow somebody who's been in the space of podcasting for this number of years, and bringing that fresh, what I call juice, I'm presenting it before you, like, hey,
Yeah.
listen, this
Juice,
is
man.
for you.
We got the
I can
juice.
see
We got the
that.
juice.
Oh, we
We
got the
got the
juice, we got
juice.
the juice, we got the juice.
That's right.
Whoa, I love that. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you something about storytelling.
Tell me.
Your your best moment yet within the space of storytelling. Can you share that with us?
Oh,
Your best moment yet, because I know you have more moments ahead of you.
yeah. Oh, hopefully. I just
You
turned 50,
do.
actually. Yeah.
My.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Well, yeah, exactly. So hopefully there's a few more, a bit more juice left in me, Amakri, right?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
haven't run out
Hmm.
yet. Best story. Shall I give you a 2 minute version
Go ahead.
of a, yeah.
We,
Okay.
we,
So,
we
all
we
right.
usually call this we usually call this in my space deep and brief.
Deep
It
and
is
brew.
going to be brief, but listen. Yes, very deep.
All right, gotcha. All right. Okay, so time me out if I overdo this. All right. Okay, I want you to picture
Go
when I
ahead.
started my
Hmm.
podcast business 4 years ago. It was me on my own, no clients. Like we talked about early days in Singapore, people
Mm,
didn't have a clue. Why are you podcasting? This was before the pandemic. Blah blah blah. Like people hadn't really got into
mm,
podcasting. Oh, you should be doing YouTube. Nobody's going to buy a podcast. I started a business. I had no clients. I had no votes of confidence from anybody around me. So it was a hard time starting out. Right. Fast forward a little bit. It was Friday night. My
mm.
friend took me
Right.
to a hawker center. A hawker center in Singapore is like an open food court where average people go and eat, right?
Mm,
And you can go and pick from food stores. So
yeah.
there I am with my friend on Friday night. We're really, really busy. So we grab the last table in the house and then we go and get our food. We sit down and then this couple comes
Mm,
across and they say, "Oh, can we sit there?" And I said, "Sure." I moved my bags. They put their stuff down. They went away and came back, got their food. Everybody's kind of sitting at the same table, the last one in the house. We started chatting. He asked us, "What do you do?" He asked my friend, "What do you do?" He makes medical devices, these kind of like glasses you wear. And then he
yeah.
started chatting to me. What do I do? I said, well, I'm setting up this podcast agency, right? I want to give people a voice. I want to bring podcasting to all these
Mm,
markets in the world, starting with Asia. He asked me a whole bunch of questions and
yeah.
we started chatting. Seemed really interested in it. Then I turned to him and I said, what do you do? And he said, I own an airline. And I sort of had a double take and thought, who is this guy? And sitting right next to me is a very famous celebrity in Asia. He's a chap by the name of Tony
Ooh,
Fernandez.
in Asia.
He owns AirAsia,
Mm,
which is like one of the biggest airlines in
mm-hmm.
Asia. He's a billionaire. He owns or part owns QPR Football Club in the UK. And he used to own a Formula One team.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, you know what it's like when you're sitting next to somebody and they're out
Yeah.
of context. You're like, no, that's not him. I'll just keep talking. Anyway, so we had a
Um,
laugh about it and we chatted. We had dinner for about an hour. Now, here's the thing, Amakri. What happened was his assistant came up to him and said, okay, you've got to go. His private jet was waiting. He's going to fly off back to Malaysia.
mm,
So so
wow.
here I am, no business, no money, no clients, needed investors, needed clients. And I thought, this is a real opportunity for me. What do you do? Because you have now 2 minutes with this guy before he's gone out of your life. You will never
Mm,
probably see him again.
same thing.
And I was thinking it through. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I had many, many options. Do I say, hey, Tony, invest in my company? I know you've got money and my company's interesting. I
Mm.
could have done that. I could have said to him, hey, I want AirAsia to become my first podcast client. I could have pitched him, but I did none of the above. I said to him, Tony, I really enjoyed our conversation today. I would love to do a podcast with you. And I pitched him that idea right there. And he
Beautiful.
turned around and said, I love the idea. Here's my WhatsApp number. Let's make it happen. Now, to cut the bits out of the
Mm.
story, get to the podcast. And you can, by the way, this is on
Mm.
YouTube. There's an actual
Mm.
interview with me and Tony
I'll go.
Fernandez on
Yeah,
YouTube. You can go and check it out.
I'll go check
It's
it
really
out.
relaxed.
Yeah.
It's nice. Got to the point, did the interview. We had an hour or more together. Really got into his
Mm.
personal story. This was his headquarters. Very casual. He's wearing t-shirt and jeans and stuff like that. And then at the end
Yeah.
of it, he said, I want to start a podcast business. And I was the right guy for it
Mm.
right there, right then. And he became, and AirAsia became our first and best client. And here's the thing about that, Amakri. You started off about corporate podcasting and why you should podcast, right? And to me, that
Yeah.
story sums it up because I could have done it so many different ways. I could have pitched him, try
Yeah.
and close him in a deal, but I made it about
Mm.
him and connecting with him first and creating that
With
podcast.
him, people,
And
the people to people connection now.
that's it. That's it in a line. And the value of that to the business, the value of that
Yeah.
client to my company, plus also the PR value of that client, because having him as a client gave me
Mm.
many other clients. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for a lot of companies, right? And so I say to
Yeah.
people, like, that story tells me is that if you create that connection, go out and connect with people in your industry. Don't worry about
Mm.
sponsors. Don't worry about monetizing your podcast. Just go out and create that connection. Wonderful things can happen.
Beautiful. I like the way you. I like the way you tell your stories. Honestly, I do. The depth in your voice and the passion with which you deliver it. It is you. I hear you. I'm not just hearing somebody. I hear Graham there. It's like you're telling that story. I'm happy for you,
Yes.
really happy. And again, I want to say thank you for doing this with me. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Those last words about sponsorship, monetization, and all that summed it all up. Sometimes we just go out there, or rather, we want to do something and we put the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
If yeah, we put the cart before the horse. But the truth is,
So,
go look for the horse. If you find the horse, forget about the cart because the horse is moving. Every other thing
yeah.
follows. Goes after the horse, and that's what I heard from that. The very tiny, tiny, tiny part of come on, let's do. I want to do podcast with you. Fine. And today is about your biggest client. Amazing story. Amazing story. Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank
guys.
you, Hamakuri.
We've been discussing with Graham Brown. You know, you will agree with me. His story is amazing. His insight to the podcasting universe is classy. And every minute, I enjoyed every minute of it, and I know you did also. But you know how we do it on the show. We always get to that point where we're like, where did time go? But actually,
Mm.
we created time, and somehow what we created is now leaving us, so to say. But I want to say a very big thank you to Graham. One last word from you, Graham, before I let you go. One last word from you.
Thank you. What can I say? I've really enjoyed this. I love your passion and enthusiasm for this. It's like really heartfelt. It's
Thank you.
really, on the
Thank you.
point of like what your audience connects with as well. So it's really genuine. I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed your questions
Thank
as well.
you.
So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, guys, we need to run, but you know how we say it on the show. We come into the space to do what? Lean on one another's experience and forge a positive path. Honestly, Graham's path, crossing our path, just created a new, brilliant path. Let's see how it takes us to the next level. Till I come your way again. Bye for now. Graham, what do you have to say?
Yeah, let's create that path, that synergy. I love it. That's what it's all about
Thank
today,
you.
connection.
Thank you.